I called 911 on an innocent man and watched him get handcuffed in front of our whole neighborhood. I spent 30 years answering emergency calls. I thought I knew how real police worked. So when a detective called and played me a whispered message from my neighbor begging for help, I believed every word. I gave them cash. Then I made the call. Real officers showed up. Ray Bennett was handcuffed on his own lawn while his wife screamed. He never touched me. In this story, I will show you how one fake detective made me believe I was saving a woman's life. Until the man I accused stood in handcuffs, and his wife looked at me like I had destroyed the only person who protected her. I still remember the color of the police lights on Ray Bennett's house. Red. Blue. Red again. They moved across his front windows. Across Carol's white porch railing. Across the faces of neighbors standing outside in their robes and slippers. And I stood behind my curtain, holding the phone with both hands, knowing I was the reason they were there. I had called 911. I had said I heard a woman screaming next door. But that was not the truth. I had not heard screaming. I had heard a man on the phone tell me there might not be time. I had heard a woman whisper my name in a message. I had heard my own old fear come back from 30 years of answering emergency calls. So I made the call. When Ray opened the door, he looked confused first. Then angry. Then afraid. Carol stood behind him, crying before anyone touched him. The officers separated them. Neighbors came closer. Someone whispered, "It is the Bennetts." Then Ray Bennett, 79 years old, was brought onto his own porch in handcuffs. Carol kept saying, "He never touched me. Please, he never touched me." And Ray looked across the yard. At me. Not like he hated me. Worse. Like he knew I had believed the worst about him. If someone you love still answers serious calls alone, subscribe before this story moves on. Not for entertainment. Because one quiet warning may reach them before a fake detective does. And before you judge me, ask yourself one thing. If you heard that whisper, would you have waited? If your answer scared you, write one word. Verify. Because I did not call those officers out of cruelty. I thought I was saving Carol's life. But before I can tell you how a fake detective made me destroy an innocent family, I have to tell you why one frightened voice was enough to make me forget everything I knew. Before that night, people in my town knew me as the calm voice. For 30 years, I sat in a dispatch chair with a headset on and a clock on the wall. I answered calls from people on the worst day of their lives. Car accidents, house fires, heart attacks, children who could not wake their parents, women hiding in bathrooms, whispering so softly I had to hold my breath just to hear them. When you do that job long enough, you learn how fear sounds. You learn the difference between panic and danger. Or, at least, you think you do. I was good at my job. I was not careless. I was not the kind of woman who believed every story she heard. But there was one call I never got over. It came in during a storm, years before I retired. A woman whispered that her husband was outside the bathroom door. Then the line went quiet. I kept her on the screen. I kept asking if she could hear me. I sent officers as fast as I could. But they were too late. Nobody blamed me. My supervisor said I followed the rules. The officers said I did everything right. But when you are the last calm voice someone hears, you did everything right does not always let you sleep. After I retired, that feeling stayed with me. I still noticed raised voices through walls. I still paused when a siren passed. I still watched quiet houses and wondered what quiet might be hiding. Some people do not get scammed through greed. They get scammed through the fear of doing nothing. And that fear was already living inside me before Detective Alan Price ever said my neighbor's name. Ray and Carol Bennett lived next door to me for almost 9 years. Ray was 79. Carol was 76. They were not loud people. No parties. No police cars. No shouting in the driveway. Just quiet. Ray was hard to know. He kept his blinds half closed most days. He cut his grass early in the morning and went back inside before anyone could speak to him. If I waved, sometimes he nodded. Sometimes he did not. Carol was softer. She had kind eyes and careful hands. She smiled from the porch when I brought my trash cans in. She asked about my roses. Once, after I had the flu, she brought me banana bread wrapped in foil. But Carol never stayed long. She would talk for a minute, then glance back toward the house, like she had remembered something she was supposed to do. I am ashamed to say this now, but I had wondered about them before. Not because I saw Ray hurt her. I never did. Not because Carol told me she was scared. She never did. It was smaller than that. A closed curtain. A short conversation. Carol missing church one Sunday. Ray answering the door when I had asked for her. None of it was proof. But proof and peace are not the same thing. I had no proof Ray was hurting Carol. But I also had no peace strong enough to ignore the possibility. And that is a dangerous place for the mind to live. Because once you are afraid someone might be suffering behind a closed door, all it takes is one official voice to make suspicion feel like duty. I was not looking for a reason to accuse Ray Bennett. But when the phone rang that evening, and the man on the line said Ray's name, a part of me was already afraid he might be telling the truth. The phone rang a little after 7 that evening. I almost let it go. Unknown number. No name on the screen. But when you have spent half your life answering emergency calls, a ringing phone still feels like something you are supposed to pick up. So I did. The man on the line knew my full name. Mrs. Carson? His voice was calm. Not rushed. Not pushy. That was the first thing that lowered my guard. He said his name was Detective Alan Price with the county sheriff's office. Then he said, "I know this call may surprise you, ma'am, but we are contacting you because of your background in emergency dispatch." I sat up straighter. He knew. He knew who I used to be. Then he said the line that pulled me in. "Mrs. Carson, we know you used to work dispatch. That is why we need your help." Need. That word did something to me. At 72, after years of being retired, widowed, and checked on by my son like I was made of glass, someone official was saying I was still useful. He told me there was an active domestic investigation next door. Then he said Ray Bennett's name. My hand tightened around the phone. He said Carol had tried to call 911 earlier that week, but the line went dead before she could speak. He said they believed Ray might be watching her phone. He said sending patrol cars too soon could make things worse. I asked why he was calling me. he said, because sometimes a neighbor sees what a victim is too afraid to say. I should have hung up. I should have called the sheriff's office myself. But he gave me a case number. He spoke like police. He knew my past. And worst of all, he said the name I was already afraid to hear. Carol Bennett. Then he told me not to speak to her yet. Not to call her. Not to knock on her door. He said one wrong move could put her in danger. And before I could ask another question, he said, I am going to send you something. Listen carefully, and please stay calm. That was when the message came through. The message came through while I was still holding the phone. One small sound, then a voice. Soft, broken, barely there. Linda. I stopped breathing. It sounded like Carol Bennett. Not clear enough to be certain, but close enough to make my chest tighten. Then the voice whispered, please do not let him know I talked. I am scared. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, and for a few seconds, I was not in my kitchen anymore. I was back in the dispatch room. Back under the storm lights. Back with that woman, whispering from a bathroom years ago, while I kept saying, ma'am, stay with me. Help is coming. Only help did not come fast enough. The detective came back on the line. Mrs. Carson, I know that is hard to hear. I could not answer. He said Carol had given that message through a protected line. He said she could not call again safely. He said Ray might check her phone. He said if I spoke to Carol, knocked on her door, or called her myself, I could put her in more danger. That was the part that trapped me. He did not just tell me to believe him. He made me afraid that checking would hurt her. Before you judge me, think about one time you were afraid not helping might hurt someone. I listened to that message again. Then again. The voice was not proof. A whisper is not proof. But when it sounds like someone begging from behind a closed door, proof can feel like a luxury you do not have time for. That night, the scammer did not need me to trust him completely. He only needed me to fear one thing more than being wrong. He needed me to fear being too late. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text. There was a case number, a badge photo, a letter with the words Victim Services across the top. Carol Bennett's name was on it. My street was on it. Ray's name was on it. I stared at those details until they stopped looking like details and started looking like proof. The detective stayed on the line while I read. He did not rush me. That made him feel more real. Scammers rush you when they want money. That is what I thought. But this man was patient. He let the silence work on me. Then he said, Mrs. Carson, I need you to understand something. This case is sealed for Mrs. Bennett's safety. Sealed. That word made everything feel serious. He told me not to call the sheriff's office front desk. He said too many people answering phones would not know about the case yet. He said if I asked the wrong person, Ray might be warned. I wanted to believe I was being careful, but I was really being isolated. Then he gave me instructions. Watch the house. Write down when Ray left. Notice if Carol came outside. Do not wave her over. Do not ask questions. Do not tell my son. Do not tell another neighbor. He said, you are not interfering, Mrs. Carson. You are helping us keep her alive. I wrote that down. Helping us keep her alive. Those words reached a part of me I thought had gone quiet after retirement. For years, people had called me when they needed help. Then one day, they stopped. My son Brian meant well, but he checked on me like I was fragile. Doctors talked louder to me than they needed to. Bank tellers asked if I wanted a chair. But this detective spoke to me like I still mattered. Like my eyes, my memory, and my old training could still save someone. So I sat by the window that night with a notebook on my lap, watching Ray Bennett's house, believing I was protecting Carol, not seeing that the case number, the badge, the letter, and the warning all had one purpose: to make me trust the caller more than the truth I could check myself. I almost called my son Brian that night. I even opened his name on my phone. Brian had been telling me for months, "Mom, if anything feels strange, call me first." He meant it kindly. But kindness can still feel like a leash when you are 72 and everyone starts treating your judgment like something fragile. Brian checked my bills. He checked my mail. He asked if I was sure before I drove at night. He never said I was helpless. But sometimes love can sound like doubt. So when I looked at his name on the screen, I already heard what he might say. "Mom, hang up. Mom, this sounds wrong. Mom, let me handle it." And I did not want to be handled. I wanted to help. Then Detective Price spoke again. "Mrs. Carson, I need you to be very careful who you tell." I asked if I should call my son. His voice changed. Not angry, worried. That could put Mrs. Bennett at risk. Those words closed the room around me. He said if Brian called the wrong office, asked the wrong question, or mentioned Ray's name to the wrong person, the whole operation could fall apart. He said Ray might be warned. He said Carol might deny everything out of fear. He said victims often protect the person hurting them. I had heard that before. Real officers had said those things on real calls. That was what made the lie so hard to separate from the truth. So I did not call Brian. I did not call the sheriff's office. I did not walk next door. I sat alone at my kitchen table with my notebook, my phone, and that whisper in my head. "Linda, please do not let him know I talked." That was the first secret. And once I kept it, the scammer no longer had to fight my family, my neighbors, or the real police. He only had to fight me. And by then, I was already trying to prove I could still be trusted. The next call came late. Too late for a normal sheriff's office call. Too late for good news. Detective Price sounded different this time. Still calm, but tighter. Like a man trying not to scare me while holding back the worst part. He said, "Mrs. Carson, we may have to move Carol before morning." Move Carol. Those two words made my whole body go cold. I looked through my kitchen window at the Bennett house. One lamp was on near the back. The rest of the house was dark. He told me Carol could not use her own bank account. He said Ray watched everything. Her phone, her car, her cards, her mail. Then he said victim services needed a temporary cash relocation bond. For transport, safe housing, emergency documents. I remember closing my eyes. Because even then, something in me knew that sounded wrong. So I asked him, why would police need money from a neighbor? For the first time, there was a pause. Not long. just enough to make me feel like I had asked a painful question. Then he said, "Because if we wait for county approval, Mrs. Bennett may not make it through the night." That sentence took every doubt I had and turned it into guilt. I stopped thinking like a retired dispatcher. I started thinking like the last person standing between Carol and a closed door. He said the money would be reimbursed. He said there would be paperwork. He said this was not a payment. It was a protected emergency bond. Those words sounded official enough to quiet the part of me that wanted to call Brian. But they did not quiet it completely. I thought of my son. I thought of his voice saying, "Mom, please tell me you did not do this alone." Then I thought of Carol's whisper, "Linda, please do not let him know I talked." When fake authority meets old guilt, a good person can be pushed into a terrible choice. And that night, I made mine. Detective Price told me to go to the bank first thing in the morning. Not to mention Carol's name. Not to mention the case. Not to let anyone delay me. He said, "Mrs. Carson, tonight we keep her alive. Tomorrow we explain." I wrote every word down like it was procedure. But it was not procedure. It was a trap. And by the time I put my notebook down, I was no longer asking whether the call was real. I was asking whether I could live with myself if I waited and Carol died. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Carol whispering, "Linda, please do not let him know I talked." By morning, I had already made the decision. I told myself I was not paying a scammer. I was not giving money to a stranger. I was helping move a woman before something terrible happened. That is how I made it feel clean enough to do. At the bank, the teller smiled at me like she always did. "Morning, Mrs. Carson." I smiled back, but my hands were cold. When I told her how much cash I needed, her face changed. "Not much. Just enough." She asked, "Is everything okay?" That was the moment I could have stopped. One honest sentence could have saved me. Maybe it could have saved Ray too. But Detective Price had told me not to mention Carol. Not to mention the case. Not to let anyone delay me. So I lied. I said it was for home repairs. The teller looked at me for one extra second. Then she counted the money. I remember the sound of those bills more than I remember walking out. Soft. Flat. Final. Back home, I put the cash in a brown envelope and wrote nothing on it. At 11:40, a woman came to my porch. She wore a navy jacket and carried a folder under her arm. She looked tired, professional, and serious. Not like someone stealing. Like someone who had done this kind of work before. She said, "Victim Services. I am here for Carol Bennett's relocation packet." I handed her the envelope. She did not smile. She only nodded and said, "You may have saved her life today." Then she walked back to her car. For a few minutes, I stood on the porch and looked at Carol's house. The curtains were still closed. The street was quiet. And for the first time since the call began, I felt relief. I thought help was moving. I thought Carol was closer to safety. I thought I had done something brave. But what I had really done was give a criminal my money, protect his lie, and prove to him that I would follow instructions. The next call was not about cash. It was about Ray. And that was the call that ruined everything. The phone rang again, just before dusk. I remember because the sky outside my kitchen window had turned that gray color right before night settles in. Detective Price did not greet me the same way. This time, his voice was low and urgent. "Mrs. Carson, listen carefully. We have a problem." My stomach dropped. I looked toward the Bennett house. A light was on near the front room. Nothing else looked different. No shouting. No running. No broken glass. Just a light in a quiet house. He said Ray had found out. He said Carol was in immediate danger. He said they could not wait for the victim services team anymore. Then he said something that made my hand go cold around the phone. "If you see movement next door, call 911 and report a domestic emergency." I said, "But I have not heard anything." He did not pause. "That may be because she cannot scream, Mrs. Carson." I stood there, staring through the curtain. That sentence put a picture in my mind I could not get out. Carol in the hallway. Carol afraid to speak. Carol looking toward my house, hoping I would do something. Then Detective Price said, "Do not mention my name. Do not mention this case. Just tell dispatch you heard a woman screaming." I knew that was wrong. I had trained people not to do that. I had taken false reports. I knew how dangerous one wrong sentence could be. But he kept talking. "If officers do not have probable cause, they may not enter fast enough. If they leave and something happens to her, we lose her. We lose her. Not she gets hurt. Not there is a risk. We lose her." He knew exactly what those words would do to me. I saw that woman from years ago. The storm. The bathroom door. The line going quiet. I heard myself saying, "Help is coming," when help was already too late. Then I saw Carol's curtains move. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was Ray. Maybe it was nothing. But by then, nothing did not feel like nothing anymore. It felt like time running out. So I called 911. My old workplace. The line I had answered for 30 years. And when the dispatcher asked what my emergency was, I said the sentence Detective Price gave me. I heard a woman screaming next door. The words left my mouth. And the moment they did, I knew I could never put them back. This is the part that still keeps me awake. I did not call because I heard screaming. I called because a fake detective made silence feel deadly. Within minutes, real sirens came down my street for a lie I had been too afraid not to tell. The sirens came faster than I expected. That was the first thing that scared me. When you call 911, part of you wants help to come quickly. But when the help is coming because of words you know were not true, every second feels like a door closing behind you. Red and blue lights turned the Bennett house into something unreal. Curtains moved all along the street. Porch lights came on. Mrs. Donnelly from across the road stepped outside in her robe. A man from 2 houses down stood near his mailbox with his arms folded. Everyone was watching. And I stood behind my curtain, unable to move. The officers knocked hard. Ray opened the door in his cardigan and house shoes. He looked confused. Then one officer asked him to step outside. Ray's face changed. Not guilty. Insulted. afraid. Carol came up behind him, holding the doorframe with both hands. "What is this?" she kept asking. Nobody answered her in a way she understood. The officers separated them. One took Carol toward the side of the porch. Another kept Ray near the steps. Ray raised his voice. Not because he was dangerous. Because he was frightened and embarrassed and surrounded. But from across the yard, through flashing lights and half-open curtains, even fear can look like anger. I remember Carol crying. I remember her shaking her head. Then I heard her say, "He did not touch me." The officer kept talking. Carol said it louder. "He did not touch me. Please. He did not touch me." Then Ray turned his head. He looked across the yard. At my house. At my window. At me. And I knew he knew. I do not know how. Maybe it was the way I stood there. Maybe neighbors always know where betrayal came from. But his face did not ask, "Why are they here?" His face asked, "Why would you believe that about me?" Then they brought his hands behind his back. Carol made a sound I still hear when the house is quiet. Not a scream. Worse. A broken, helpless sound. Ray Bennett was 79 years old. He was handcuffed on his own front lawn while his wife begged strangers to believe he had not hurt her. And I stood in my house with my phone still in my hand, finally understanding that I had not saved Carol. I had delivered Ray to the police. By morning, the lights were gone. The street was quiet again. But what I had done was sitting on every porch, behind every curtain, and inside every whisper in the neighborhood. The next morning, the street looked normal again. That almost made it worse. No police lights. No sirens. No neighbors standing in the dark. Just sprinklers ticking in front yards and trash cans waiting by the curb. I stood at my kitchen window with a cup of coffee I had not touched. Then I saw Ray. He was carrying grocery bags from the car. Carol walked behind him, holding a carton of eggs. Ray said something I could not hear. Carol laughed. Then the carton slipped. Eggs broke on the driveway. And Carol laughed again. Not nervous. Not trapped. Just tired and human and standing beside her husband like nothing I had imagined was true. My stomach turned. Because in that one small moment, the whole story I had believed started to fall apart. Carol was not hiding from Ray. Ray was not guarding her like a prisoner. They were just two old people cleaning eggs off a driveway after the worst night of their lives. Then Carol looked across the yard and saw me. She did not wave. She walked over slowly. I opened my door before she knocked. Her eyes were red. Not from fear of Ray. From crying because of me. She stood on my porch and asked, "Linda, why did you tell police my husband hurt me?" I had no answer. No honest one that would make it better. I said there had been a detective. I said there had been a case. I said I had heard her voice. Carol stared at me like I had spoken a language she did not understand. Then she said, "I never called you." Those 4 words took the floor out from under me. I called the sheriff's office myself. This time, I used the real number. There was no Detective Alan Price. No sealed case. No victim services pickup. No relocation bond. No message from Carol. The badge was fake. The letter was fake. The voice was fake. And the worst part was not that I had been robbed. The worst part was standing on my porch, looking at Carol Bennett, and realizing I had helped strangers break something real. I called Brian that afternoon. For the first few minutes, I could not say the worst part. I told him there had been a scam. I told him about the fake detective, the fake case number, the victim services woman, the cash. He went quiet but not angry yet. I could hear him breathing through the phone. Then he asked, "Mom, how much?" I told him. There was a long silence. Then he said, "Okay, we can deal with that. We will call the bank. We will file a report." That was my son, trying to be steady for me, trying not to make me feel small. But he did not know. He did not know the money was not the part one could not live with. So I told him about the 911 call. I told him I had said I heard screaming. I told him I had not heard screaming. I told him Ray Bennett was put in handcuffs because of my words. Brian did not speak for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said something I still hear in my sleep. "Mom, you used to be the person people called for help. How did they make you hurt someone?" He was not trying to be cruel. That was what made it worse. He was asking the question I had already asked myself 100 times. How? How did they take the part of me that once helped people survive and use it to break someone else? After that, everything changed. Ray stopped looking at me. Carol stopped crossing the yard. Mrs. Donnelly, who used to ask about my roses, looked away when I checked the mail. At church, people still smiled. But softer. Careful. Like I was a cracked dish they were afraid to touch. I reported the scam. I gave the real sheriff's office every number, every message, every fake paper. But reporting it did not remove the handcuffs from Ray's memory. It did not give Carol back the night she stood on her porch begging strangers to believe her husband was innocent. And it did not give me back the woman I thought I was before that call. I was not careless. I was afraid. I was not trying to hurt Ray. I was trying to save Carol. But scammers know something families sometimes forget. A person may hide the truth, not because they do not love you. They may hide it because they are terrified of losing the way you look at them. That is why I am telling this now. Not to clear my name. Not to make what I did smaller. But because somewhere, another phone is going to ring. Another fake badge is going to sound real. Another frightened voice is going to make a good person move too fast. And if my shame can stop one secret rescue before it begins, then maybe Ray's name was not broken for nothing. I have replayed that call more times than I can count. Not because I think I can change it. I know I cannot. Ray Bennett will always remember being handcuffed on his own lawn. Carol will always remember begging strangers to believe her husband had not hurt her. And I will always remember standing behind my curtain, finally understanding that I had helped make it happen. But I am telling you this because shame only protects the scammer. Silence only protects the person who made the call. So here is what I wish someone had told me before Detective Alan Price ever said my name. A police call is not proof. A case number is not proof. A badge photo is not proof. A letter with victim services on it is not proof. And a frightened voice, even one that sounds like someone you know, is not proof. The warning is secrecy. The warning is urgency. The warning is when someone tells you not to call your family, not to call the real sheriff's office, not to tell the bank teller, not to tell the full truth to 911. Real help can handle the truth. A scam needs you alone. That fake detective used 4 moves on me. First, he used the old dispatcher in me. He made me feel chosen. Then he used the whispered victim. He made me feel like Carol's life depended on me. Then he used police permission. He made suspicion feel like duty. And finally, he used the false rescue. He made me give cash, keep secrets, and call real police with words that were not true. That is how he turned my greatest strength into a weapon. So if anyone calls you with a badge, a case number, a secret emergency, or a voice begging you not to tell, pause. Hang up. Call the real office yourself. Use a number you find on your own. If someone is in danger, call 911 and tell the whole truth. Do not lie for a caller. Do not hide for a caller. Do not become part of a secret rescue. A secret rescue is the warning. Real help does not ask you to lie. And if this story made you think of someone who answers serious calls alone, send it to them. Not to scare them. Not to shame them. Just to say, if anything ever feels urgent, call me first. And if these quiet stories help you protect your family, subscribe before the next call reaches someone you love. Because I cannot make Ray Bennett look at me the same way again. But maybe my mistake can stop one more good person from being used to hurt someone innocent. And if that happens, then maybe the truth I was most ashamed to tell can still protect somebody else.